The COVID-19 pandemic that seemed to be slowing down just a few short weeks ago has now ramped all the way back up. As a physician on the front lines, I am seeing more and more people diagnosed with COVID, even some who've been vaccinated. Unfortunately, the disease has had a strong and terrible toll, affecting countless families across the country and around the world. In America alone, there are over 600,000 deaths that have been attributed to the COVID-19 virus and infections. And we don't see any closure to this in sight. In fact, things seem to only be getting worse as we now have to grapple with new variants, Delta variant, and even now the Gamma and Lambda variants, some of whom they're hoping will not be more deadly, but seem to be at the outset. In our program, we're going to discuss all of this. Some have asked, where does COVID come from? Others are confused as to how such a virus was able to circle the globe, making so many sick. There's even the question of the impact of lockdowns, masks, and yes, the biggest of all, what's going on? Should I be vaccinated or not? Are the vaccines safe? So as we begin to look at all of this, I can tell you that at the onset of this pandemic, I was a little skeptical as to the seriousness of the COVID-19 virus and at that time, fledgling pandemic. But I can tell you that I've seen enough to know that there are many who are getting sick from this virus who are under 40 years of age and who have either had serious illness and wound up in hospitals or even lost their lives. As we go into this talk, we're going to look at this virus, look at the pandemic, even grapple a little bit with something very controversial and even divisive around the vaccines. Please join me as we discuss this important topic.
Dr. Walsh was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He is a graduate of the University of Miami School of Medicine, Loma Linda University School of Public Health, where he received his master's and doctorate in public health. His most important educational experience was his time at Oakwood University. He has served 2 U.S. presidents, George W. Bush and Barack Obama, as an advisor on HIV/AIDS. Dr. Walsh has served at several churches as an associate pastor. He is now a practicing physician and healthcare administrator. He travels the globe speaking on many subjects. Dr. Walsh, good afternoon. How are you doing?
Good.
I want to welcome you to Did You Know? And would just want to have a conversation this afternoon about all of what's going on in the world with COVID, the Delta variant, all the other variants, and what can we do? What do we need to do? What information do we need to have so that we can adequately make good decisions based on good scientific information? So I just want to welcome you and just jump right in and let's start the discussion.
All right. So I think for our session, I think what's important is to put things back into context, understand the real dangers that are out there, and on the flip side of it, understand the things that can be done to protect ourselves. This thing is dragging on a lot longer. It's changing in scope as the very different variants now come into play. We're seeing different groups of people get sick and even die than we did initially. And all of that, is creating increased anxiety. And kind of as we title this, COVID-19 has now become more of a pandemic of uncertainty. Every time we think we've figured this thing out, it switches up on us and, kind of comes back with a vengeance. So we should talk today a little bit about all of the different things that are going on. And I know there were some questions we're going to go through. Let's just go through those. I have some graphics, and we can kind of go from there.
So I guess the first question is, what is the impact of COVID-19 on society, just generally speaking?
Clearly, the impact is profound. I mean, let's not even talk about the health and wellness. Let's not talk about deaths. Let's not talk about sickness. Let's talk about the financial impact of lockdowns, the academic and scholastic impact of
Hmm.
schools being closed. Let's talk about the division in the country over issues like masks and vaccines. And never mind all of the diseases of despair, which have actually gone up. Diseases like, conditions and events like suicide rates have gone up, domestic violence, even overdoses, opiate overdoses have all gone up, as well as things like alcoholic fatty liver disease. So we've watched this thing actually have profound effects outside of even normal, what we'd all consider normal health parameters. And of course, from a health perspective, it really has a lot of people messed up. A lot of people have lost loved ones, and many of them have been sick themselves. I was talking to someone yesterday who's in her 30s who got COVID along with her whole household, and she was out for like 3 months with a severe abdominal pain that to this day no one ever
Wow.
figured out. Thankfully, she's better, but so it's had an impact in so many different ways. Churches weren't able to open. Businesses weren't able to open. Vacations had to be canceled. The anxiety and stress of this novel, unknown virus lurking around every corner has caused people to become really, some of them, really panic stricken. And the news media has not given you all the information you need to be as strong as you could be physiologically in the middle of this pandemic. And so, hopefully, that's some of what we'll give today.
Great. So when we talked, like, we said just a lot of general information available about how many people have died, how many people are in the hospital. More specifically, I should say, when it comes to, say, children and teenagers, this was not affecting young people and children. Has that situation changed any?
I would say yes, that has definitely changed. We are now seeing, I was just reading about a hospital in Florida that had all along had like zero COVID cases, and now is having has 20 kids in the hospital. Um, Initially, looking at this to show you an idea on this graphic, the average daily deaths in the United States from COVID-19 in June 2021, you can see heart disease, cancer, and accidents were up top. Um, but you can see there that COVID was number 7, and this is in June after the big waves had passed. Just to show you that still, COVID still does take a lot of lives and is ranking pretty high. The big thing that jumped on the scene, of course, is the Delta variant. This is from a few weeks back, but a couple weeks back. But you can see that quickly this new variant just took over. And I think one of the things everyone has to understand that there will be more variants. There already are. There's a gamma. There's a lambda. They're going through the Greek alphabet. They're probably going to go through it pretty quickly at this rate. Um, but these variants each come with unique characteristics because these are the result of mutations that the virus goes through as it replicates so much. And if there's a mutation that
Wow.
gives it some kind of advantage in or that it can uh, be better, more contagious. Remember, all the virus wants the virus doesn't really want to kill you or hurt you. It just wants to replicate. It just wants to divide and just wants to be more and more and more and more of them, kind of mindlessly. So as it does that, of course, the system of replication is not perfect. The DNA changes. Some of the variants and mutations will cause it to not be very effective, and those will die off. And the ones that, of course, mutations that happen that actually make it more contagious and more symptomatic are the ones that are going to make it live longer and make that variant take over. So the variant that is more easily contracted because of changes to its genetics, and the one that creates more symptoms, so people cough it, sneeze it, shed it more in their nasal and mucosal passages, those are the variants that are actually going to do better. And that's why Delta is doing so good. It has a lot of those characteristics.
So, Dr. Walsh, how is it that this COVID-19 have been affecting the minority community?
USC had a study out. They put out a publication here. It says USC Leonard Davis, USC study COVID-19 reduced US life expectancy, especially among Blacks and Latinos. The COVID-19 pandemic, which claimed more than 336,000 lives in 2020, has significantly affected life expectancy. USC and Princeton researchers have found. The researchers project that due to the pandemic deaths last year in 2020, life expectancy at birth for Americans was shortened by 1.13 years to 77.48 years. And that was a study published in the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. That is the largest single year decline in life expectancy in at least 40 years. It is the lowest life expectancy estimated since 2003. That's pretty profound. The
Wow.
declines in life the declines in life expectancy are likely even starker among minority populations. So for blacks, the researchers project their life expectancy was shortened by 2.10 years, and for Latinos by 3.05 years, compared to whites where it's 0.68 years. And what we know for a fact when you look at this is that the nationwide, black people have died at a rate of 1.4 times the rate of white people. That was put out back in March of this year. So we have seen that there is a pretty significant impact on health and life expectancy from this virus in the African American community and in the Latinx community. Let me say some other things that we found were
Uh-huh.
really impacting life. And the first one I want to talk about is the fact, if you put up the slides again, that this disease actually did well in people with these comorbidities: high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, coronary artery disease, dementia, all the way down to heart failure. And we know that part of that is because of stress. So before we get to the vaccine, we want to
Okay.
say that one of the things that actually made it worse is that they found out if you were stressed out. So researchers are worried about chronic stress and COVID. And we know that this is because of the chemical cortisol in the body, which when you are stressed out, you release more cortisol. And what happens, you can see it up here, actually weakens your immune system. So it doesn't matter how well you
Wow.
eat, doesn't matter how much you run, how much you exercise. You get stressed out enough, it can and will impact your immune system. And that is something that, as the pandemic exploded, the stress levels, our collective stress levels, also increased, right? And so it's one of the reasons things did well. I won't get into too much of the science of this, except when your cortisol levels stay high for too long, you get cortisol resistance. Then what happens is there's nothing to block. Cortisol normally blocks inflammation from the immune system. There's nothing to do that when you're super stressed out. So one of the reasons why managing stress in this situation is so important, because if you get super stressed out, you actually go into a hyperinflammatory state with your immune system. This is literally how COVID works. It gets into your body through H2 receptors, which are everywhere all over your body, gets into your cells, and once it attacks, your immune system responds by inflaming, which is part of the immune response, but it goes into what we call a cytokine storm. When it gets into the cytokine storm, that's when this thing causes some very serious, or can cause some pretty serious disease. And it's one of the reasons why, part of the way to manage this disease is to not be too panicked, not be too stressed out, right? There's studies going all the way back to 1991, where they took 324 healthy participants, um, and exposed them to one of five respiratory viruses, including a coronavirus way back then, not our coronavirus, but a different one. They were quarantined and monitored, even after controlling for age, sex, education, their weight, prior antibody status. The researchers found that a person's underlying stress levels were associated with an increased risk of getting sick. You get that? So if someone is more stressed, they're more likely to actually get sick. And this is
So
information. Oh,
isn't that like the perfect storm in that if stress plays a major role in how much this virus affects you, the stress of the situation itself is going to cause you to get stressed out. So it's a no-win scenario.
it's like a spiral of death. I mean, it's like the more stressed the society gets, the worse it gets. And you can see from this slide here, what happens, of course, is ultimately, you get the COVID, you get inflammatory signals, and if you get to that cytokine storm stage, that's where you get acute respiratory distress syndrome, multi-organ failure,
Wow.
hyperinflammation syndrome, and then ultimately you can get death. So that's why drugs like steroids they found were actually quite helpful. because it blocks the immune response. So a lot of people are like, well, I want a super strong immune system. No, what you want is a very effective and precise immune system, because you don't want it to just go willy nilly and a tornado pouring through your house and just tear up everything trying to kill a mouse. Um,
Right.
so um, that is a big part of what we are looking at, and we'll get into some of what you can do before we get to the vaccines to be healthy during the pandemic. But stress is a major part of it, and there have been a lot of stressors over the last 18 months.
Yeah, I think there's really no way to work around that, because when you have society falling apart, you have jobs, people being laid off. All of that is just compounded stress, and so the very thing that you need to be in that calm state of mind is stressing you out even more. So you really don't. Again, I say it's a no-win situation.
Absolutely, no-win
Wow.
situation, and that's why it's a time to make sure you stay calm, do what you can to protect yourself, but not overreact to the news reports and to what you see going on, because that can actually make you more susceptible to the virus itself. And so I'll talk a little bit before we get to the vaccines about what you can do to protect yourself. And one of them is take vitamin D. Um, Vitamin D binds to these cells, the macrophages and neutrophils, and facilitates gene expression that makes the cells better at killing pathogens. On the other side of it, though, vitamin D also helps on the adaptive side of the immune system, by blocking inflammation, decreases inflammation, which again is the way that COVID does the damage that it does. So vitamin D is one of the things I tell people. You want to do something simple, take 5,000 international units a day, 3,000 international units a day at least, of vitamin D, especially during the winter months, to stay safe. The second thing is be careful how much sugar you're taking in. The white blood cells are designed to destroy pathogens. But when you eat sugar, the sugar decreases the concentration of vitamin C in your white blood cells. And when the concentration of vitamin C in your white blood cells go down, um, you're only able to destroy about 25% of the bacteria or viruses. So sugar consumption is one of the things you definitely want to not do during the time of a pandemic. I won't get into this. It just shows you that the inflammation that comes from eating meat, because of the endotoxins that are in there and the way the saturated fat helps them get across, also causes inflammation. And what you really want to do is to be on an anti-inflammatory diet, because you need zinc, right? Zinc is one of the things that actually is very helpful. A lot of people take it as a supplement, but you have to be careful. These are heavy metals, and there's some science that suggests heavy metals like zinc and iron can actually lead to brain memory function problems like Alzheimer's. So you want to eat your zinc, in my opinion, if you can, because your body regulates it a lot better. Then there's another compound called quercetin, found in turmeric, which is what makes curries and so forth of Asia, and even a lot of curry on the island of Jamaica. And but the curcumin from the turmeric is highly anti-inflammatory. I won't get into the science of that, but it actually helps to protect you. So there's a list of some foods that are rich in zinc. These are foods that we really should be eating: everything from beans, green vegetables, mushrooms, and different types of nuts, to whole grain foods like raw oats and cooked brown rice. So quercetin has an antiviral, anti-inflammatory, and antioxidant properties. Chronic inflammation can escalate and result in various diseases, particularly cancers, right? It helps to build the immune system. And these are some foods that are rich in quercetin. Everything from elderberries. This is why when you go to the drugstore now, you see so many elderberry based supplements, all the way down red onions, white onions, cranberries, hot peppers, all the way down to spinach. All has quercetin, all very good for you. Foods like mushrooms are proven to have some antiviral properties. Reports of green leafy vegetables, and all of these things really do help with fighting the COVID itself. So especially if you've got COVID, I tell my patients, I put them on a, because it seems to me that that's one of the primary ways you need to fight this. This just shows you a little bit about how COVID works as we move into talking about the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, It has an incubation of human cells, and what it does is it gets into these ACE2 receptors I mentioned earlier, and so it gets into the body and it does its work. Um, and as we ask the question about vaccines, should we be vaccinated? Should we not? I always remind people that before vaccines, these diseases were a lot more prevalent. There are diseases like smallpox we don't even see anymore. I've actually even seen someone, some people who are, I guess, anti-vaccines, basically saying, this isn't because of vaccines. This is because of hygiene, and I'm not sure where they get the science to back that up. But we know that once vaccines came on the scene, a lot of these diseases just began to disappear. This is the global smallpox cases went down pretty rapidly after vaccines were introduced. Same with paralytic polio. The two rounds of the vaccines being introduced to the point where you don't see polio anymore. And this is polio in the United States after these things happen. Obviously, these things wax and wane. So you could always say, well, it wasn't a vaccine. And so, because you have low points, but it's always shot back up at some point. It would come back. Kind of like COVID is doing to us now. It goes away and
Right.
it comes back, goes away and it comes back. So in order to get it to do this, where it flatlines and goes away, vaccines had to be introduced. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that argue that, but really difficult to argue that the vaccines have not been pretty critical in the eradication of some of these diseases. And one of the things when we talk about the vaccine, people ask the question, does it affect my DNA? The DNA is stored inside the nucleus in here. The two most prevalent vaccines right now, Moderna and Pfizer, don't ever enter into the nucleus. They actually stay in the cytoplasm and never go in here. And when they get in here, this is a fatty lipid layer, the purple line here. The vaccines are designed to have a lipid layer, and inside of that lipid layer is the messenger RNA that would go into the cell. And once it gets inside the cell, it'll tell the cell to actually make the spike proteins that I didn't mention, but where we saw we'll jump back on a previous slide here, you can see the spike proteins. And these spike proteins are what actually connect in. So if the antibodies bind the spike proteins, and you need enough antibodies, that's why, they say one dose of the vaccine is enough, two is enough, maybe more of them will do. Well, if Delta makes too many, a very spike protein dense virus, you need more antibodies, and maybe your immune system doesn't have a robust of enough response to do that. I mean, getting off, but so there's different types of vaccines. There's the one here by AstraZeneca, which is a viral vector where they genetically modify the virus. Moderna and Pfizer are both RNA, as we just talked about. Pretty effective, 95% effective.
Let me jump in and just ask you a question there. What is the big difference between, how do I say, all the older vaccines and these two new there's several of them that have been created. What is the difference to technology that created them?
So the technology that created the two that are most prevalent in the United States, the Moderna and the Pfizer, is that you're able to you inject the substance into the body that actually goes into the cell, goes into the cytoplasm, and causes us to make the antigen, the spike protein. Our own cells make it. Doesn't mess with our DNA, but it makes it, and it puts it out there. Our immune system recognizes it as foreign, and since it's only the spike protein, you can't get COVID from it, but it does elicit an immune response, which is why some people get chills and shakes and body aches and stuff after they get it. The older viruses, a lot of times, are either killed, like they attenuated and weakened the virus, or they killed the virus, and then they inject it into you. And because it couldn't cause disease because it was weakened or killed, your body was able to recognize enough of the antigens, make the antibodies, and then be able to respond to the virus if you're exposed to like chickenpox per se. So that's the difference. This is a newer technology, and it's part of why people are afraid. It's something new. But I think we live in a world where we're walking around with cell phones, and we use microwave ovens, something that 60 years ago nobody used. And I remember when microwaves came out, my mother wouldn't buy one. She said, the technology is too scary. I don't know what this thing might do to us. Same thing with cell phones. The cell phones have advanced. People say, it causes this, the radiation. And all of these things do really come with some risk, because you never know for certain anything. Sometimes it takes decades before you figure out something. But
Right.
it's the vaccine is similar to that. I mean, it's a new way to do it, but it's still like 20 years old. But it is a more effective way, in a sense, a cleaner way to do it, which is why it caught on. And I think in 20 years you'll look back and kind of laugh at, man, everybody was so scared of these vaccines, and we'll probably be using them for other things. And some of the diseases that we've not been able to get vaccines for, maybe we'll be able to because of this technology.
And that is all the new technology is what they're referring to as the mRNA.
Yeah, there are some that does goes into the nucleus and does the DNA, but we the two that are in the states are mRNA, so I'll kind of just focus on those, because those that we've had, half the U.S. population that's eligible has been vaccinated with 2 doses or with the complete doses. That's pretty large number of people. That's over 100 million people, and so it's not that we don't have experience with these vaccines. We, again, half of the eligible people, which would be those 12 and over, have already gotten this 2 doses of this, and another, right another 100, 50 million of however many have gotten 1 dose of it. So the vaccines are rolling out. What we're noticing is that in states where, like Louisiana and Florida and Texas, where the pandemic has come back with a blitzkrieg style, and really killing a lot of young people, or killing more young people proportionally than it did initially, as more young people are not vaccinated. We're watching people going and get vaccinated. People who didn't want to get vaccinated initially are going to get vaccinated, because what the vaccines do, and I think this is the point, it's not that these vaccines will stop you from contracting it. Just like having the chickenpox vaccine doesn't stop you from getting chickenpox. It means you won't get a bad case of the chickenpox. You won't die from the chickenpox. And same principle here. It will keep you out of the hospital, and keep you, and keep you alive. Now, there are 3 to 6% of the U.S. population that does not have a good immune system for various reasons. Everything from chemotherapy to diabetes to steroid intake to medical conditions that cause it. So if you give 100 million people the vaccine and 3 to 6% of them don't have an adequate immune system to mount a response, let's say 3%, just to be conservative, that's 3 million people. So there are a lot of people who are going to get the vaccine because so many people are being vaccinated that are still going to have some, could still get it, still have symptoms, and still even die from it. And it'll go back to some of those comorbidities, especially like diabetes, which actually legitimately, because of the increased sugar levels that we talked about earlier, legitimately lowers the immune response, that the individual is able to mount to fight the virus.
When it comes to the safety question, particularly long term, seeing that even though this technology has been used for some time, but at the same time, the application within the people, long term, how do you gauge that? Is there any way to gauge that over the long haul?
Yeah, I would say for sure. What we know right now is, and I actually missed some slides for you on the different types of vaccines, but we've already given out more than 291 million shots. This is old. This is from March. So we've given out lots and lots of these. Traditionally, what the science tells us is that vaccines just don't have side effects after 2 months. We say, well, this is a new technology. This is even more fragile than a normal vaccine. The 2 mRNA vaccines have to be transported at insanely low temperatures in order for them to stay alive. I'm gonna go back a few slides here. And so because of that, they're very fragile. So once they get into your body and they work, they don't last very long. They won't be in your system for too long. What will last longer is kind of the immune response. But as you understand the vaccine, it doesn't do that. So what we know is that in the first 2 months after you get the vaccine, that's if you're going to have a problem, that's when it should happen. And we're not seeing that.
Wow.
And the media has reported out when they've had the issues around myocarditis, about 100 cases out of the millions of vaccines that have been given. There was the Johnson & Johnson. There was some blood clotting issues or concerns. Even a pause was done. We've looked at the science, and it was at about the rate that you'd get blood clots even if you weren't on a vaccine or hadn't been vaccinated. And so we're finding that the vaccine's very safe. Uh, is it are you going to have some adverse side effects? You might, because everybody's very different, and somebody could be allergic or have some overreactive response, whatever the case may be. But in public health, you don't look at the one case. You're looking at a population, and you're saying, listen, we've had over 600,000 deaths from the coronavirus itself. And based on the data we had everyone been vaccinated when coronavirus got to this country last year, February, March, and made the news, um, we would not be looking at 600,000 people dead. I mean, we'd maybe have a couple thousand people dead, maybe 50,000 people, 10,000, I don't know. But it would be far less people would have died because of coronavirus. And that's what public health is looking at. How do we keep this from killing 2 or 3 million people? And there's some people who have said, they're okay with that. Let the virus just do what it does. But that's a difficult thing if you're in leadership or in a position of responsibility to say, let's go ahead and just let this kill people. Now, as you can argue that they let people take other risks, but this is one that, for whatever reason, public health, this is what it's designed for, to try and prevent these innocent deaths of people from contagions like this. And so, just showing you this is how the Pfizer vaccine works. And when you look at the Pfizer vaccine, you see that there's a lipid nanoparticle here, goes inside the cell, and it makes, spike protein sticks out, the antibodies come, and it develops your immunity. There's 4 different basic ones that they're using. And these are you were asking about the old type. The old type was like the weakened inactive vaccines. The ABC News put this out. Right? This is the one like Sinopharm and Sinovac. So I have friends that are waiting for Sinovac to come to the States. If they want an old school style, that's fine. I mean, take the inactive version. Some people are trying to put in just subunit fractions, like the Novavax does that. And the viral vector vaccine, this one goes more into the nucleus, and that's like AstraZeneca and Oxford, J&J. They work differently. The ones that kind of we use are these, which use the RNA to go in and allow the human cells to make the spike protein itself. So again, here's how Johnson & Johnson works. I won't get into that too much. But it allows for an immune response to happen. Since the beginning, African Americans have trailed in getting vaccinated. And that's kind of been unfortunate, because when you look at it, if African Americans are more likely to die from this, you'd want more people to be getting vaccinated. But and I understand there's a lot of distrust. There are a lot of churches where people are encouraging people to get vaccinated. There are a lot of churches where people are telling people not to get vaccinated. And it's kind of unfortunate. Some people look at this vaccine as if it is the most evil thing ever. Don't realize it's really not that complicated, not that sophisticated. It's a new technology that actually, again, it's going to probably be used in medicine for a while. I remember initially when it happened, this is one of the great actors of our day, Idris Elba, a British actor, and we were told initially, this is back in March of last year, Black people can't get coronavirus. That was the word on the street. Then Idris Elba got it. He said, stop saying Black people can't get the coronavirus. That's from March 18 of 2020. Now the line is, you shouldn't get vaccinated. Hey, this is a poison. This is a jab. Don't let them put this poison in your arm. But it's funny, no one's talking about the fact that Black people are disproportionately dying. And some people, are saying, it's because of our skepticism around, experimental treatment from the past, which is true. But, a lot of Black people still, take medicines and go to the hospital. I mean, in fact, most that I know still do once they're sick. I don't think that that's really the issue. I think it's a lot of misinformation and fear. And this is why Fauci and the former president really wanted to highlight this young lady here, Kizamika Kia Corbett. So a lot of African Americans probably don't know, but there's a Black woman who's actually critical to Moderna's creation of that vaccine. So you can pull down the slides. This is we're at that kind of a juncture now, and a lot of people are really trying to scare people more than anything out of taking it. And I'm okay if people choose not to take it. I think what worries me is that a lot of people are not taking it simply because they're getting misinformation. People are exaggerating the danger risks. They're talking about VARs. the VAERS, the vaccine um, incident reporting system, that people can report into. But a lot of the people are showing what the CDC website says and not giving the caveat. These are reported things. Anybody can report into it. After I got the vaccine, I literally could have just went on there and said, this thing caused me to grow a third arm, and it would stay on there. Because it's just a way for people to put information in. It's combed to see if there's any legitimate patterns, but it's not substantiated. And here's the thing: if you give 100 million people an apple today, this is from a biostatistical perspective. If you give 100 million people an apple today, and in 2 weeks you look to see how many people died, you'd find that a lot of people died after you gave them an apple. Because unfortunately, death is a part of life. And it's a similar thing with this vaccine. And I'm not saying that there aren't people who are going to have bad reactions to it, but a lot of people will get this, whether they get the vaccine or not, would have died 2 weeks later. And that's part of what's difficult to gauge. The science will maybe one day find if there is some predisposition or risk factor for bad outcomes from the vaccine. But overall, when you consider, whole nations have been vaccinated almost, like Israel, they've not had any major problems with the vaccines. The big scare for a lot of people now is that they're finding that nations like Israel are having resurgence in cases. But fortunately, what's happening is they're not having resurgence in deaths and hospitalizations to the level it was before. And that's really the point of the vaccine. If everyone was vaccinated and you turn this into the common cold, where people get some sniffles, but nobody, very few sick people would wind up in the hospital, that, you could manage the pandemic. And this is why they're pushing you to get the vaccine. Now, I'm not a fan of mandates. I'll be clear about that. But there's two sides to it. If you run a corporation, a lot of people are saying, well, they're forcing us to get it. If you run a corporation and you don't do everything you can to protect people from coronavirus, and people get it, theoretically, people can come back and sue the corporation or give the corporation bad press. So everybody's just trying to protect themselves.
Right.
Just like people are saying, I don't want the vaccine to protect myself. The reason a lot of these places are mandating it is to protect their entity, their organization as well. That's a big part of big business in this country. I would only say, really look at the risks objectively, really look at what's happening. There's so much misinformation about this. And as we see more and more people getting the vaccine, we realize, more it's safer and safer and safer. And again, in states like Louisiana and Florida and other places, what we found is that people have decided to go get the vaccine who didn't want to get it before, because now they're realizing that, no, this thing is for real. It has shifted with the new variants, so that we're seeing 30-something-year-olds, 40-something-year-olds, children even, hospitalized in rates that was not happening in the first waves of the pandemic last year.
I want to go back to something from earlier. So we realize that the virus mutates the longer it's out there and it's not coming in contact with the vaccine. So at that rate, will that mean that the variants are just going to continue mutating and becoming stronger and stronger? Is there no way to mitigate that?
That can happen. It doesn't have to happen, but every year we get different flu. The flu shot is different every year because every year the flu vaccine is mutated and looks different. So sort of the flu virus looks different. So every year the flu vaccine looks different. That could happen with COVID. You could be that every year you get a shot because the new variant. We know what the new variant looks like. They create a booster for it, and you get a shot. That could happen. As far as will it get worse and worse, that's harder to tell. I can only say that if the virus is allowed to run rampant, like it did in India there for several weeks earlier this year, new variants will appear. And one of the reasons we want people vaccinated is to stop that from happening. So that it doesn't get a chance to do that, because the severe cases don't happen, the symptoms are milder, it doesn't spread as well, and ultimately we protect more people.
So, Dr. Walsh, you've presented some really interesting information here. Taken a few notes, the vitamin D, and I think the most dynamic piece of information I got was stress, and the effect of stress with this COVID-19. That's a showstopper. And that will really, one nugget that I think everybody can walk away from here and say, this is one simple thing that I can work to control that's going to help me to reduce, if not keep me from getting really sick, in addition to the vaccine itself. So I really appreciated that, and I think the audience will appreciate that. So what would you give us in just some closing thoughts, some nuggets for those who are struggling? Should I or should I not?
Again, I think it's up to you. You make a decision if you want to get vaccinated or not. I think it is important to have the right information and know that these vaccines are proven to be very safe, comparatively speaking. People get into automobiles every day and drive. Automobiles are the reason for a lot of deaths in the world.
True.
And I remember when I was a kid, nobody wanted to, and they mandated seatbelts. They were saying they were taking away our rights, and this was becoming a draconian society. Yet we now look back on that and say, seatbelts have saved, countless lives. You'll probably never even be able to count the number of people who are alive because they were wearing a seatbelt. The vaccine is a little different. It is a lot more personal. It goes into the body. And again, I think you should get the right information and make a choice for yourself. I don't believe it should be forced on you, but I don't think it's wise to be misinformed either. And I think that's the scariest thing, because you don't want to be misinformed. I think for many people, they need the protection. They have comorbidities. They are older in age, or they're around people who are older in age, or they have small children that now we're seeing get sick from this variant. And so I would say, look at all of it. Do everything you can to protect yourself. See, I don't think it's an either or. I live a good, healthy lifestyle, or I get the vaccine. I think you do everything you can to protect yourself and to decrease the risk that you spread it to other people. So everything from stress management to the right diet to the vaccine to make you as impermeable as possible to this. Because again, I as a physician have seen very young people get very sick and even die. And there's one of the tragedies was a couple in their 30s, had a 14 and a 12-year-old son here in this state where I live, and one parent died, and 2 weeks later, the other parent died, leaving the two boys orphans. And it broke my heart when I saw that story. And this is what we're trying to protect against. And most people are going to get it and do well. It doesn't have. Fortunately, it's not. The death rate of this is not as bad as it could be. It could have been worse. But the mortality rate is significant enough, and it's not just that. I didn't talk about long haul COVID and all of that, where we've had people who for months still can't smell or taste. I told you about the young lady earlier who had abdominal pain for 3 months. No one figured out why, and then it went away after she got COVID. And I can go on and on and on. The people that I know that have got COVID and months later still can't breathe well, still having troubles with their breathing. And these long haulers may have some even cognitive problems later on. So people ask a lot, what are the long-term effects of the vaccine? You have to also ask, what are the long-term effects of getting COVID and getting sick with COVID? Even if you don't get super sick with it, could you 3 months later be having shortness of breath and other problems that you didn't have before you got the infection? And that's why we're encouraging people to get protected. We see a big health disparity and health inequity in the death rate and the disease rate around this virus, and we want to stop that. We want to protect people from that, and that's why we're doing it. I'll take my bumps. I'll have people, get mad at me for saying it, but the vaccine is something that should be strongly considered. I got the vaccine as soon as it came out. And obviously I'm around and take care of patients who have or might have COVID. But I think all of us this thing is not going to stop spreading anytime soon. And you want to be protected and safe in case it gets to you and infects you, and to protect you from spreading it to one of your loved ones.
Well, again, Dr. Walsh, I want to thank you so much for all the great information and insights that you have provided. And I pray that those who will watch and absorb this content, that it will be a benefit to them in some way. So again, appreciate your time, and we look forward to doing more of these interviews with you and some of your associates as we kind of dig a little deeper into this subject.
All righty.